Hello. Yesterday, one of the strongest tournaments of the year came to an end. The Masters final tournament, which was held both in Brazil and in Spain, was won by Magnus Carlsen. Carlsen played an astonishing second half of the tournament, made 4 out of 5 possible points, and by this he managed to share the first place with Fabiano Caruana. So they had to play a tiebreak, a blitz tiebreak, 5 minutes each, 2 games, and Carlsen won this tiebreak with 2-0. So he is the winner of this year's Masters final tournament. One of the most interesting games, at least for me, was his game against the world champion, against Viswanathan Anand. This game of the 8th round or 9th, I'm not sure. Carlsen played with white and Anand with black, and I would like to take a look at this game. Carlsen started with e4, c5, knight f3, d6, and now bishop b5. Once again, we see that Carlsen is not going for huge theoretical lines and instead is going for a calm, quiet line which maybe gives him a slight advantage, but not much. Maybe one of the reasons why he decided to play this line was that Anand had some trouble, not only in this tournament where he had a difficult game against Caruana, but also several months ago when he played against Sergei Tivyakov and suffered a severe loss. Bishop d7 is considered to be the most solid answer. Bishop takes, queen takes, and now c4. Here white is going to go for a Marocci setup. We will see this in a few seconds. Knight c3, g6, and now d4. C takes d4, knight takes d4, and this is the usual Marocci setup with those pawns on c4 and e4. White controls the center. It's not easy to play d5 for black, and he has some space advantage. This is probably the reason why Carlsen played this line. Here's a slight space advantage, and it is maybe more comfortable to play with white. Bishop g7, f3, and now Anand played rather unusual queen c7. Most natural move in this position is definitely castle, and by the way, castle is not the best because then there's a nice strike here, rook c8, b3, and d5, and this move equalizes immediately. This is why bishop e3 is considered to be maybe more challenging here. Okay, and the position should be around equal, but well, it's just a normal game and white can play and see what happens. Let's go back. Queen c7, b3, of course the pawn needs to be protected, and now queen a5, and now white had to make a decision whether to place the bishop on d2 or on b2. Carlsen decided to play bishop b2. After, for example, bishop d2, black could play knight c6, attacking a knight on d4. And now let's say knight d5, queen d8, bishop c3, and now black can solve this tension in the center with e6, and after a massive exchange of pieces, the position will be around equal. See, this, and queen takes, and this position should be equal. Okay, bishop b2, knight c6, castle, and now Carlsen decided to retreat this knight from c3 to e2, maybe to stabilize the center knight here on d4. But you can see that the white pieces are not really active, they're not playing really harmoniously together. So you could say maybe that Anand won the opening battle. But this, of course, doesn't mean really anything, because the middle game is of much greater importance than the opening. Anand played rook fd8, completely normal move. Bishop c3, queen b6. Carlsen decides to remove his king immediately out of the pin. And now Anand played d5, which seems to be a pretty strong move. It is indeed a good move, but it leads to some complications. We will see this in a few minutes. Okay, first of all, what is the point? Okay, Carlsen played knight takes c6. What happens if white just takes this pawn? By the way, it doesn't make a difference whether taking with the e or c pawn, so e takes d5 and just takes back. Knight takes d5. C takes and rook takes d5, and black is kind of exploiting the fact now that white is not fully developed and cannot unpin and cannot protect this knight on d4 one more time, so black will regain the piece. Probably best would be now queen e1, but then knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes. White can take this pawn on e7, but still the position is more pleasant for black because he's more active, as you can easily verify. So Carlsen played knight takes c6 at this point, e takes c6, and now queen e1, which is a good move. White removes his queen out of the d file and simultaneously threatens bishop a5, winning an exchange. Maybe this is the first critical moment of the game, because Anand decided to play rook dc8, and to me this looks rather unnatural, because the rook is placed nicely on d8, so maybe it was a possibility to play a5 here and prevent bishop a5, and also maybe having the opportunity to play a4 later. If white continues like in the game with e5, then now knight d7, and after e6 black has the possibility to play d4. And here white has a lot of choices. Let's say bishop b2, but no, black just takes knight f4, e5, knight e6, and the position is not clear, of course, but I think it's more solid than what happened in the game. But still, of course, completely unclear. Okay, rook dc8, it's a small inaccuracy, but nothing severe definitely. e5, knight e8, and e6. Carlsen decides to sacrifice a pawn, and Anand accepts the challenge. F takes e6. It was also possible for him to play here f6 and f5 or f5. For example, f6, rook d1, d takes e4, b takes e4, knight d6. But I can understand why he didn't go for this line, because the bishop on g7 is out of play, this pawn on e6 looks rather intimidating. But still, black's position is pretty solid, and white has some weaknesses here on a2 and c4 as well. So this was also possible. F takes e6, knight f4. Okay, bishop takes c3 is forced, queen takes, and now d4. And surprisingly, Carlsen is not going back to e1 where queen came from, and is not attacking the pawn one more time. Even though, of course, this was possible as well. The game could continue with c5, knight takes e6, and white's position might be slightly preferable here as well. But Carlsen has a different idea in mind. We will see this in a few seconds. Okay, pawn on e6 is hanging, so c5 makes absolutely sense. Also protecting the pawn on d4 one more time. Rook a1, knight g7, and now g4. What is the idea of g4? First of all, it limits the squares of the knight on g7, rather dominates the knight on g7, and the plan of white is now to play knight h3 and queen h6 and attacking the black king, and it is very difficult for black to prevent this plan, but there was still the possibility. But Anand played rook c6 at this point, and then the game is almost lost. The only, maybe the best way to prevent this plan is queen d6, with the idea after knight h3 to play e5. And if now queen h6, then knight e6, preventing knight g5. So probably best would be queen g5 here, and now game might continue with a5, queen takes e5, and it should be, I think, around equal here. Even though maybe I would prefer white, but it should be around equal. After rook c6, game is almost over. Knight h3, and this knight on g7 is just so badly placed. So Anand decides now to move it to e8 and to bring the knight to f6, but still it's too late. Black's pieces are somehow too passive. If you look here, the black forces, queen and rooks, are all on the queen side, and they're not able to help the king, which is on the king side. So Carlsen played queen h6, now knight f6, knight g5, and probably the main problem of black's position is that he is not able to gain any counterplay. Anand decides now, kind of desperately, to create some confusion pushing this pawn forward, but it doesn't change anything. Rook e5, and now the threat of white is to take on h7. Let's say a random move like rook d8 would be replied with knight takes h7, knight takes, queen takes g6, king h8, and rook h5, and mate in the next move. Oh no, I made a mistake here. Delete. Okay, d3. Rook e5. So of course Anand saw this threat and played king h8. But now Carlsen just calmly rook d1, and apparently there's no way to protect this pawn on d3. Either rook d8 or rook d6 is answered by knight f7 check, winning the exchange. Anand played queen a6, maybe trying the last time to make up some confusion, but just a4. Carlsen just prevents, or just protects his pawn on a2. And at this point, maybe surprisingly for some, spectators, Anand resigned. Okay, why did Anand resign? The position is lost, by the way. It was completely fine for him to resign. The point is, black's pieces are just too passive. White will take this pawn on d3 in the next move. And then all pawns, e6, c5, e7, a7, they're incredibly weak. And it will be just a matter of time until white can take them and collect them. And Anand knew that it would be an easy task for Carlsen to finish his game, or maybe he was frustrated by the course this game has taken. So he decided to resign at this point. Yeah, a really convincing game by Carlsen, who did not get any advantage out of the opening, but rather outplayed Anand in the middle game with a nice pawn sacrifice and this really, one could say, brilliant plan with g4 and knight h3, which is rather unusual. I did not see anything like this before. Yeah, it was a perfect example of how Carlsen likes to play. He doesn't care much about the opening, he just plays and is confident that he will outplay his opponent in the middle game. Okay, so far so good. Thanks for watching and I see you in the next video.